Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's session is all about making every basis point count, especially as we head into 2026 planning season. Even with rate uncertainty, one thing remains clear: tax efficiency and liquidity planning are top of mind for every treasury team we talk to. So with that, let's go ahead and go into introductions. My name is Rachel Green. I'm a senior sales executive at Jiko. And day to day, I help treasurers and CFOs match their cash strategy with the right solutions. And the reason I'm here is to really bring that perspective into today's conversation. I'm joined today by Lenny Gravier, a seasoned CPA strategist and professor at the University of Miami. Lenny, thanks for being here. To start things off, can you share a little bit about your background and the kind of work you do with clients today?
Well, it's first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And I actually have a lot of fun doing these types of formats. So I started my career at Arthur Andersen, which back then was one of the big eight. And I was with Arthur Andersen for roughly about 10 years. And then after that, I subsequently joined this firm, HLB. And throughout my career, I've mostly have been in the international and domestic tax space. And one of the things that I've always made sure is I like to keep current with what's going out there. So I started to teach as well at the University of Miami and also at the Wharton School of Business about 8 years ago, because I felt that it would be a great idea to be able to connect with students as well as connecting with corporate America, if you will. So I deal a lot with family offices. I deal a lot with some large PE funds, but I'm also very much involved with the community as far as the young professionals of tomorrow as well, and that gives me an opportunity to take their take on what's going on in today's economy, world, et cetera. It's quite unique.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lenny. I think it's really helpful for our audience to understand not just your background, but the lens that you bring when you're advising family offices, students, corporate America, like you said. And what I'm hearing is that your experience really sits at kind of this intersection of strategy and kind of day-to-day, operations, which sets us up for the rest of the conversation really well. So moving on here. First question for you is, when did you first see the intersection of tax strategy and treasury operations come into play in your work? And how has that shaped your approach today?
Well, it's been an evolution, because you gotta understand that at one point, especially in the family office space, interest rates for savings were very stagnant and very low. So hoarding of cash was not particularly attractive to family offices, because you had interest rates sitting at 1%, 1.5%, 2%. So there wasn't that many options available to family offices that had a lot of cash. Subsequent to that, from I would say 2021 on, 22, 23, where interest rates started to go up, and you had the prime rates going up to where they're at today, the 10-year treasuries, et cetera. Family office started to reposition themselves and saying, listen, I don't want to be, family offices have always been very risk adverse, because they always want to make sure that they have the necessary cash available to be able to go after a particular opportunity or investment. So they have to have very good liquidity. So what I've seen is the CFOs and the CEOs of family offices, I've seen them gravitating into these instruments, if you will, that give them a very good return. But in doing so, when tax law changed some years ago, if the family office ends up into individuals, you got to understand that the individual income tax rate went up to 37%, and on fixed income such as interest income, you add on to that the 3.8 investment tax. So essentially, you could be at a 41.5 plus, depending on if you're a resident of a particular state that has a high taxing jurisdiction, like, for example, New York or California. We in Florida are lucky that we don't have an individual income tax. So that's when they started to like fuse together tax strategy along with treasury and asset management, because a lot of family offices gravitated into, oh wow, I can suddenly now have great use of my cash, yielding at 4.5%, 4.75%. The effective tax rate on interest income, et cetera, is the highest as compared to dividends and capital gains or long-term capital gains, which get taxed at a maximum 23.8. So you started to see a play of, wow, actually saving money and earning this much is actually helping me on the burn rate that we have on our own family. In other words, burn rate on such toys like yachts and airplanes and stuff like that, all of a sudden they start paying for by themselves. So it was really interesting throughout the years to see how that played out and how it got easier for CFOs of family offices to stay on the safe side, yet make enough of a return where a lot of the expenses would be paid for by themselves. So we got into how could we maximize the deductibility of some of these expenses, if you will, with the interest income or the earnings that you're making off of these safe investments now. So that was very interesting to see how that played out throughout the years up until today.
Yeah, that's really, it sounds like your approach has constantly been evolving based on market conditions, what you're experiencing with the family offices that you're working with, the interest rate environment. And it's really good to kind of understand that background. So I want to shift a little bit here, especially as we're anticipating interest rate cuts in September. We know that these shifts can perhaps shape the priorities for 2026. So let's go ahead and dive into that. As we sit here in September and plan for next year, what are the areas of focus for treasurers, especially for the next couple of months?
So what I get to see, a lot of family offices have a full team of experts, if you will. They have economists. They have all sorts of money management professionals dealing with them. And, as a CPA on the sidelines looking at the tax impact, you get to see how all the different actors interact. Right now, I just had a conversation yesterday with an economist of one of our larger family offices, which is pretty international. And they're anticipating no less than 2 possible rate cuts from here until the end of the year, with 0.25 each time. So their anticipation, or their triggering is, well, what are we going to get into now that we can lock in? Because we don't feel that the interest rates are going to either stay the way they're at or they're going to go up. We feel that they're going to go way down, and we've already gotten used to our burn rate, and we've gotten used to the level of earnings that we're making on our cash, and we don't want that to be depleted. So now you're starting to see a lot of planning of, well, how can I make sure that I keep the music going? They've gotten used to having, several millions and millions of dollars that they have availability to. That's what I call, not free money, but free in the sense that, you're actually making money on money, and actually you're putting it to good use because it's helping with your burn rate or with other investments. And all of a sudden, you see these possible rate reductions that are going to be coming up this year and probably next year as well. And you're seeing the actual dynamics of these economists and these CFOs and family offices trying to lock on to something that will at least give them more life, or it will keep the music going for at least 2 or 3 more years as they adjust their own budgets, if you will, to accommodate to having lesser inflows of money coming in from a safe investment like the 10-year treasury, CDs, money market accounts, etc. So you're seeing a lot of hands-on trying to predict the future in anticipation of, if I can keep my burn rate, the way that it's going right now, what can I do to maximize to make sure that, that I'm not dipping into other resources. So it's really quite interesting to see this play out.
Yeah, I really think what you said there is really key. Treasurers, people in corporate finance, they're really in a planning mode right now and really trying to predict what's coming for next year. And those priorities you highlighted set the tone for how they're going to navigate the year. And so, of course, those priorities are influenced by the bigger macro picture, which brings us to the outlook for 2026. So looking ahead to 2026, can we talk about the macroeconomic outlook? This year saw significant market volatility in April in response to tariffs. Now we're likely headed into an easing cycle. If you were to kind of distill what you said, maybe pick one or two things that you expect to see in 2026, can you share what that would be that might affect treasurers and their cash strategies?
Well, I think that one of the questions that I get asked the most by the managers, if you will, of these family offices is that, do I anticipate or do we see any sort of tax legislation that's going to increase tax rates on passive income, for example? Nobody was expecting a 3.8% increase, otherwise known as Obamacare, way back then. And they're kind of like, they know that there's not going to be a reduction in that space, but on the contrary, that there may be an extra amount of tax that could possibly come up. So I get asked a lot, what do you, how do you feel when you speak to, I get to do a lot of lectures and speak to a lot of members of Congress that are actually writing laws and presenting laws, et cetera. And one of the questions that I ask is, are you guys anticipating a move going on in 26 and beyond that's going to impact the tax landscape as we know it? So I think that that's probably what's in every money manager's mind right now is there going to be a tax increase coming up in 26? Along with the fact that they're also kind of not nervous or worried, but they're also kind of like looking at, well, we see 26 may be a very transitional year. We still don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs. We don't know if the Supreme Court may say that you've got the appellate court saying that the tariffs were illegal, agreeing with it. Now it's going up to the Supreme Court. That should be coming down the pipeline in the next 2 or 3 weeks or a month from now, which eats into the 26 year. So there's a lot of turbulence, if you will, right now going on into how do you anticipate what's going to happen or what the landscape is going to be in 2026. I will tell you that based on the numerous conversations that I do have with corporate treasurers, with people in the business, it's a tough one, 26. And they're having a tough time trying to figure out what exactly is the tax strategy or what exactly is the cash strategy that they should be adopting in the 26 year, because it's up for grabs. We really just can't get a good grip on what's going to happen. We do know, and I'm convinced that obviously rates are going to go down. That's going to help a lot of different things. But we don't know what's going to happen on the tax landscaping side, if the tax rates are going to go up or if they may impose some sort of an alternative tax that would be geared solely towards investments and not the actual income tax rate. And that's happened before. You'll see that capital gains and dividends are taxed at a very different rate than ordinary income is taxed. And you'll see that interest income is taxed at a very different rate as well. So that may play out and happen somewhere in 26.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, as we can agree, rate shifts, potential tax increases, all of these ripple into how finance teams manage cash. And I think that's a really great setup for the title of our session, which is making every basis point count. So let's go ahead and shift into how treasurers can think specifically about yield, taxes, and predictability all in one. So from a tax perspective, how should treasurers be thinking about where they allocate cash, especially if they're trying to improve returns without taking on significantly more risk?
Well, budgeting becomes number one when you're dealing with that type of situation. And I get involved tremendously on the budgeting side, because you got to think first about what you spend before looking at the top line. So budgeting has become probably the biggest field right now where money managers and treasurers and family office, et cetera, they're having to revisit their actual budgeting on their expenses, and even being more cautious as to what they're going to be investing on. For example, a lot of our family offices will make a significant investment on startups, on a specific industry that they like. They're being a little bit more cautious on that, because if the incoming environment changes, if you will, it's going to change the dynamics of their entire investment and their entire way of thinking as to expenditures as well. So any family office is always thinking about two things on cash outflow. One is my budget. What am I spending money on? And that could include just the regular expenses of the family offices, entertainment, et cetera. The second thing that they're always thinking about is, well, our next investment into a startup, what are we looking at? What percentage of our money are we going to be allocating into this particular space? That right now in 26, that's becoming a huge topic, if you will, with my clients, because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen with the top number, which is the incoming money as well.
So we hear from a lot of treasurers that predictability matters, not just in yield, but in how the returns are taxed. So for treasury teams thinking about tax reporting and planning, are there certain types of cash instruments that tend to make things simpler or more predictable from a tax standpoint? And on the flip side of that, what is an example of a security that could add complexity?
Well, going back to what we previously mentioned, family offices and treasurers are always very concerned about not only their yields, but on their on liquidity events. So, for example, the fact that you're in a particular investment that you're able to liquidate in a hurry, that's of particular importance. Some of the things that I see that are attractive from a tax perspective, but not attractive from a money perspective. For example, municipal bond interest. Here's a instrument that is exempt from federal taxes. However, it has a liquidity factor to it in the sense that whatever you invest into it may not necessarily be what you liquidate out of, and that's always of primary concern to the CEOs and the CFOs of family offices, because they're always very cautious about protecting principal. On the other hand, going into other types of like treasuries, there you know that your principal is protected, and you pretty much have a good certain outlook as to what you're going to be returning. And that's certainly very important when it comes down to budgeting, because a lot of family offices and funds work on the bottom line first, and then they work up into the top line, which is the incoming cash.
Yeah, I really like that you called that out. As you noted, municipal bonds, they can be attractive for the tax benefit, but then they present challenges around liquidity. And we really think that's where Treasury's access through Jiko can really stand out, providing immediate liquidity while still delivering competitive yield that is exempt from state and local taxes. So moving on to the next question here. At Jiko, we've actually built our banking model around U.S. Treasury bills. They're one of the safest, most liquid instruments available. They offer that competitive yield. And so one of the added benefits we often talk about is their exemption from state and local taxes. So from your point of view, how should treasurers be thinking about T-bills as a tool when it comes to both optimizing yield and improving after-tax returns?
Well, that's a great question. Here's a couple of things that are really important related to that question. From a tax perspective, the U.S. government on U.S. persons and corporations obviously is going to tax the interest income, if you will, from treasuries. However, what a lot of people don't realize is that the U.S. has become the savings bank of the world. If you are a foreigner and you live in a foreign country, and you invest in treasuries, you are completely exempt from U.S. tax, and that becomes very lucrative. And this is a rule that has existed for many years in this country to entice foreign income into our system, into our banking system, into our own treasury, if you will. That is extremely important because it hauls in a lot of cash into our country. Different again than munis that are not exempt and that pose a liquidity issue. These other instruments that we're talking about, and in this case, treasuries, it becomes a very safe investment and a very predictable investment from returns, if you will, to domestic and foreign money as well.
I think that is such a huge takeaway for our webinar listeners. So appreciate you saying that, especially for foreign investors. While we're on the topic of T-bills, I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So, government and treasury money market funds are popular because they offer a mix of yield and liquidity. They also tend to be on the safer side of the money market fund spectrum since most of their holdings are in treasuries. Now, we know that when you hold treasuries directly, you get the benefit of that state and local tax exemptions. But what about when they're held through a money market fund? Do those exemptions get passed through to shareholders? And is there a specific threshold for how much of the fund needs to be in treasuries for that to apply?
So that's a great observation. So one key thing, number one, is that the interest that's earned from these instruments, they have to be looked at in two different ways. One is from a federal perspective, and the other one is state and local income tax. From a federal perspective to a U.S. person, these are going to be taxed. Interest income, in whichever form, is going to be taxed. However, from a state income tax perspective, there is a specific law, which is Law 31 in the U.S. Code, specifically Chapter 3124, which the federal government mandates any state is prohibited from taxing interest on direct U.S. government obligations. So as a result, all states must exclude treasuries or interest on treasuries that you own directly from state and local income tax. They're going to get taxed from a federal perspective, but when you add on, the fact that you're also getting a free ride from a state and local income tax perspective, especially in those high taxing states, it's a huge bonus because you're not going to get taxed. Different than a fund like an ETF. In the fund, then it's up to the actual fund to determine what's going to be taxable and what's not going to be taxable because you're not owning the instrument directly. Funds always tend to caution, or they always tend to border on caution and make more of a play towards taxable, not non-taxable, because it's on them. So having a platform where you're able to directly own an instrument that for a fact is going to be exempt from state income tax is very important.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how much of an important clarification that is. I know a lot of people in the audience are weighing, money market funds versus ETFs versus holding treasuries directly. It really sounds like the takeaway seems to be that owning the instrument directly is really the only 100% sure way to get that state and local tax exemption without any, kind of confusion there. So I really appreciate
it's actually law of the land. because it's in the U.S. code. So every state must adhere to it, including our friends in New York and California. So you're going to have states that obviously, because of federal law that's as old can get, is completely exempt from the state income tax, but only if held directly. And that's where a platform that has that becomes such a huge tool.
Awesome, Lenny. Well, we have covered so much in this short amount of time. Thank you for all of the insights here. Before we wrap up, I want to go ahead and ask, if you had to boil it down, what are the 2 to 3 takeaways you think our audience should glean from this webinar as they continue to plan their cash strategy for the year ahead?
Well, there's a couple that I see from my perspective. Budgeting is always going to be of paramount importance. And that's something that I get to see from our clients, is that they hone in extremely on budgeting and actual expenses versus budget expenses. Number 2 is that they always want to have a safe investment, that they're able to have an immediate, if the immediate liquidation event happens, they're able to utilize that. So not being stuck into a particular instrument or a particular structure is of paramount importance. And the third thing that I'm getting more and more this year is what is going to be the tax environment, if you will, towards the end of 25 and at the beginning of 26. Is there going to be tax legislation that's going to be impacting investment income or passive income, et cetera, that would be different than what we presently have right now? I would say that those are the 3, 2 to 3 different components that I'm listening to more and more.
Awesome. Yeah. So just to kind of recap what I heard you say, 1 is budget and planning is always paramount. 2, focus on vehicles that really provide and prioritize liquidity. And 3, be aware of possible changes to tax legislation.
Yes.
So with that said, Lenny, we'll go ahead and just pop in here to the action items for today. So thank you so much for everyone who joined us. We'll be sending out a full recording of this webinar shortly. And if you'd like to keep the conversation going, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn or reach out using the Get in Touch button. If you're interested in learning more about how Jiko supports direct access to T-bills and helps streamline cash strategy, we would love to chat. Thanks again for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.